Is now Fired Up Freedom. I just want to do a little bit of a recap of season 1. It was amazing. I had so much fun, a lot of amazing guests, a lot of great conversation. It was really, really awesome. If you're someone who wants to have a growth mindset, if you're someone who wants to take action and go towards your goals, then Fired Up Freedom is great for you. It doesn't matter if your goal is financial or personal. And now that we're moving into season 2, we're going to be talking a lot of different things surrounding freedom.
No. Do I just feel like, oh, she's saying I'm unattractive? Like she's saying no because I'm unattractive, or like I'm out of her league, right? But what evidence do I really have to justify kids or these children or these young professionals now, right, to be able to kind of say things a little more skillfully, respectfully, while still disagreeing. So these are the kind of situations I like to help people with. And so, yeah, are there moments of breakthroughs? Yeah, of course there's bright spots, and I hope we highlight those and celebrate those, and just understand that the game is far from over.
Well, hello there, family. You're listening to Fired Up Freedom with Steve Ryan. Fired Up Freedom. All right. Do you ever look for certain services or products and it's just hard to find and you want to know if someone else has used that before? Well, visit my resources page, steveryan.com/resources, steveryan.com/resources. Fired Up Friday is now Fired Up Freedom. All right. Hello. What's going on? Welcome to Fired Up Friday. How's it going today, Jerry?
Oh, I'm doing great, Steve. How about you?
I'm doing awesome. Always awesome. So I've been looking over your stuff and it's like, wow, you're pretty good. Conflict resolution coach and you're really helping like Asian American leaders advance their career and life journeys. And you've had pharmacy leadership roles and just it must take a lot of patience.
Yeah, it was a process for sure.
So what got you started in wanting to help other people? Like, have you always been someone that liked to help other people and negotiate?
Yeah, it showed up in different forms, right? I think the first time I was basically asked to help somebody was in first grade when one of my classmates was struggling with math, and my teacher was like, you're a bright kid. She needs your help. Please help her. And of course, why do I need to do anything? But it set an interesting tone later on because, I started to tutor students in high school and then through pharmacy school. And then just later on in life, you realize, hey, you know what? I've been in this teaching skill for a little bit now. May as well, make the most of it, whether it's helping through volunteering or just, private business, things like that. And so that grew in a couple different ways. In pharmacy school, we gave presentations for topics. And so there's kind of like this teaching skill, so tutoring, and then like starting to do teaching and Sunday school classes, things like that. And then also for salsa dancing, I've been a volunteer instructor for a couple of years now with my alma mater. So there's this idea of helping. And so to get into the coaching space, when I was in the middle of some really tough career transitions, I was asked to help teach some leadership development material through a pharmacy nonprofit some of my friends run. And so teaching leadership, right, was kind of what unlocked a lot of interesting things, because now before I said, wow, leadership is hard. I could never do it well, right? And, I struggled with it, didn't want to look incompetent, so I just shelved it like forever. And then after teaching it, right, now I'm like, well, what if I could be good at this? Maybe I can be good at this. And, you go through the process and the struggle and the failure, but eventually you keep at it long enough, you start to come out better on the other side. Right. And so now, after enough job drama on the pharmacy side, I said, well, I'm tired of fighting insurance companies and chasing scripts from doctors, but I love the people development side of things. So, and I would know how wish I'd been developed as a leader, growing up. So what if I turned around and did that for other people so they would be better equipped to handle the challenges in leadership? So, that's kind of how this came about.
Wow. Now, a couple things. Did you say salsa dancing? So you're a dance teacher?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's a
wow.
really involved hobby. Yeah, it's just it's not a professional. I don't have any trophies on my shelf or anything like that, but I do get a lot of hugs and compliments, and I think that's a good enough trophy for me. So yeah, I like that.
Do you have any footage like on Instagram or somewhere online of you dancing and stuff, you know?
There are a couple clips here and there. Mainly, they're shared among friends' channels and some YouTube stuff. But if I find one, or I'd be happy to upload it later. If people want some kind of proof, and say, because no, believe me, Steve, convincing Hispanic women that I actually know what I'm doing is just an uphill battle. Like every time I step out on the floor. So yep.
I might just have to pull it on the screen. Is it under Jerry Fu? What is it under?
Oh man, I don't want to hold up the pace of the podcast, so we'll table it for now. But we'll get
Okay,
to you in the show notes later on. Absolutely.
Okay. So so with the wow. So with the pharmacy, your background on that, like were you a pharmacist or
Yeah. I still actually do still work as a pharmacist as I build up
uh-huh.
my coaching practice. So yeah, I've been a pharmacist almost for 17 years now. So the first 5 years, we're at a chain pharmacy close to where my family lives in Tennessee. And, my mom, my parents came over from Taiwan and my dad struggled with his job path just, as an immigrant. And so my mom was telling me, insisting me that I just work for this chain pharmacy for the stability that my dad never really had. And so it didn't matter how miserable I got, just bank away money for 20 years and maybe one day you'll be happy. And of course, even though my mom had never worked a day in her life in pharmacy, right? Moms know best. And so, I kind of just didn't have that conflict fight in me to deal with my mom's, insistence. So I just kind of gave in. And so for 5 years, it had its ups and downs, but after 5 years, I knew that I needed something different. And so I leveraged my connections to take on a teaching job with a pharmacy consulting company, which I moved to Houston for, and proceeded to get fired 11 months later, just because, no, it was my fault. I just didn't take it seriously enough because for the chain pharmacy job, right, as long as I was better than 70% of the workforce, and that wasn't hard to do, even if my boss was upset with me, she's like, well, we need to keep Jerry around because overall he's a good worker. But in an entrepreneurial setting, right, you are paid to get a job done. If you don't get the job done, right, they're going to find somebody who will. And, stories about why you didn't get the job done aren't going to cut it. And I did not learn that lesson well until after I became a manager. And, I hear some of the same people I've had to either write up or fire say the same things that I used to say. And okay, it doesn't work. You're right. It sounds great. I use that same thing. It just doesn't work. And so to finish up the career path side, I ended up at a House of Cards job where 4 of my paychecks bounced, filling for crooked doctors. And so that was a tough 9 months. Really, 1-2 reality punch, right? And, how do you confront the guy who's clearly ripping you off? And so,
Wow.
after 9 months of that, because I couldn't quite quit because I needed to chase down one paycheck after another. And so I had to kind of finesse that out of him. But I still never saw my last paycheck. And then leveraged my connections again, got me on with another job that was more legitimate, but couldn't pay me more than 8 hours a week. And so, I said, what do I do? And they said, well, you can cover shifts out in Austin, which is about 2.5 hours away. And, that was the summer where I was tapped to teach leadership. And that was kind of what altered the trajectory. So still, in independent pharmacy jobs, these don't last very long typically because the business model is hard to, survive against chain pharmacies and insurance companies that are trying to drive out the smaller companies. But for the time being, it's nice to have a couple more job options that are a little better. But the long term goal is to do coaching full time. So that is the exit strategy for this coming year.
Wow. And toward working on that goal and strategy, is there any particular thing that you're doing to try to make it, come true?
Yeah. Well, I mean, hang on. I don't know. Let me try my camera real quick because it likes to die on me. Give me a second. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, the first step is to survive, and so the first year I was officially in business, which was October 2020. The first year, yeah, it was like I mainly did private tutoring to just stabilize my cash flow and cover my expenses, right? And in the meantime, it was plant as many seeds as possible, right? And so the first strategy was, hey, get on podcasts, right? Exchange a meaningful conversation for access to an audience that wouldn't have otherwise, and see where that leads. And honestly, it's been the best form of networking I've done in the year and a half I've been in business. I did have some coaching gigs through some friends that were warmer traffic, but yeah, the continual strategy is, hey, keep networking, keep asking, not directly for favors or referrals necessarily, but just to get to know people, find out their pain points, see if those align with the skill set that I offer, and just be brave enough to make the ask. And I'll admit, my struggle is to move more quickly and to get past the no's and to find the yes. And so,
Wow.
yeah, but I mean, it is, and it's true for anyone in entrepreneurship, right? Like if you're afraid of rejection, that's fine, but just understand that until you get cash flow in the door, your fear of rejection will kill your business.
Wow. And so like if you're coaching someone and let's
Mhm.
say that this fear is extremely heavy to the point of making it hard for them to really, like let's say
Mhm.
they're paralyzed. Do you have any
Mhm.
like techniques or tricks that can, get them unstuck?
Of course, that's what they pay us for, and I need it for myself, really. Now, the first question to ask, really, so some of the things that we can approach it from, is to ask yourself, what is the story around the rejection, right?
Hmm.
Because I mean, let's take a dating example, right? Just to kind of we look at some parallels there, right? Let's say I ask a girl to dance or I ask a girl out on a date, right? And she goes, nah, just like like she even gives a little chuckle, like no, right? How do I interpret that, right? If she says no, do I just feel like, oh, she's saying I'm unattractive, like she's saying no because I'm unattractive, or like I'm out of her league, right? Or but what evidence do I really have to justify that, right? Because in my mind it makes sense because I think I can justify it, right? But what if she's saying no because she's laughing because like she's just in such financial or emotional straits where she's just like, like I shouldn't be dating anybody right now, right? Like I have no capacity to have a boyfriend, right? And so when you ask people, and I'd ask myself, when people say no, is it because they don't like me, or I'm not like qualified, or what exactly is it? Or maybe it's just a bad fit. I mean, give them the benefit of the doubt, trust that saying no is what spares you time and energy going toward a cause that ultimately might not work out for you. And the no is what actually lets you move on to the next opportunity. And you realize it's nothing personal, right? From the flip side, right? Let's say I'm a business owner, right? And a friend of mine says, hey, Jerry, times are hard. I need a job, right? Am I just going to say yes just because he's my friend? It's like, no,
Hmm.
right? And when you realize, as Don Miller says, no, rejection is just a part of life, right? If you had a sister, right, you wouldn't want her to just say yes to any guy that asked her out, right? Things like that, right? And so we say, okay, let's study the story around, what you feel about rejection and why. And we ask you, say, hey, are these self-limiting beliefs, actually accurate? Because if they're not, right, what's a better story you can tell yourself? What's a more effective story that would let you move forward with your business, right? And then the other take is to simply ask them, well, what's your next action? Well, that hurt. It's like, well, no. Well, what's your next action? I guess I need to pick up the phone again and call somebody else to see, if they want to work with me, right? So when people realize, hey, it's not the end of the world, it's just another thing to do. Hey, you know what? Maybe it's not that bad. And you realize, hey, it's nothing personal. I just need to keep going. And I think that's what helps me, reminds me, hey, you know what? I'm still at zero if I don't fire the shot. So you know what? I better fire the shot. So yeah.
That is not a bad analogy. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
almost it's almost like saying, "What do you have to lose?"
Exactly. Like you're no worse off when you started, so you can't go like -1. Like no one's tracking to say, oh, you only closed on like 25% of your deals. If you close on 25%, that's still really good. Baseball players, they're lucky to hit half the balls that they have to swing at, right? That's like Hall of Fame level stuff. But no one ever looks at
Yeah,
that, right? No one ever says, oh, they struck out so many times. And it's like, no, like if the highest percentage is like 45%, then that's a pretty nice margin for error.
wow. We're going to take a small commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Fired Up Freedom will be right back after these messages. Do you ever have moments where you feel stress, anxiety, or it's hard to sleep? Then meditation may be the perfect thing to help you. Come and join our meditation channel where there's 24 hours a day on demand meditation music. It's time to have freedom from the noise.
All right, we're back. So that was very interesting things that you went over, and I know one of the things that you do also is to help Asian Americans deal with like the culture conflict, you know, a lot of things, hardships that people can go through. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. I'll give you a couple examples, real life examples from clients' experiences, right? So, one simple example is, one of my clients at one point, there was a girl at church that he was attracted to. We decided to ask her out. She was kind enough to give him her number. He tries texting, calling a couple times, and just basically, it's unresponsive, right? But then he goes online and does some research on her name and finds out she already has a boyfriend. It's like, okay, now what do you do? Right. And it's easy to jump to the quick conclusion that she's just like heartless or whatnot. Right. And it's still her. Like let's not downplay, the actions there. But, he's asking me, how do I deal with this? Right. And, we say, hey, approach with curiosity. Right. If you're struggling to find courage, hey, you know what? Just get curious about the situation. Let's call her Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer, help me out here. Right. I asked you out. You're kind enough to give me your number. I was excited to reach out to you. And then, after I didn't get a response from you, I go online. It turns out you already have a boyfriend. So what's going on? Right. And, she, apologized and said, hey, yeah, I was just afraid to just tell you no. And that I was already spoken for. And then he can press in a little and say, hey, well, wouldn't it just have been easier just to let me know that you weren't single? And it's like, yeah, that probably would have been better. And so, right. And so she realized after the fact, hey, you know what? Lying about my status just because I'm too afraid of what might happen if I say no, even though I have a legitimate reason to, actually makes things worse. Right. And he was just so happy, that he finally had this closure. He's like, yeah, I'm sad that, I don't have a possible date or anything like that, but I'm so glad I don't have this pent up resentment in me because of what she did. Right. And so that's on the personal side. A professional side. So another client, at one point after hours, her boss calls her on her cell phone, and she doesn't pick up because she's off the clock. She's out with friends, and she doesn't. It's just like it can't be that important, or even if it is, I'll just wait till the next day to deal with it. And of course, next day, her boss is this passive aggressive, vague person, just blows up at her. Hey, I don't think you're really committed to this job. Like, why didn't you pick up? I needed you and to answer a question, and you didn't answer. And she comes to me and she's like, how do I navigate this? Right? Like, how do I resolve this frustration in me? But how do I make sure that he doesn't fire me if I accidentally antagonize him and hit some other tripwires when I'm talking to him? Right. And so, I talk about how there's kind of like two forms of coaching. One kind is, the certified kind where you ask questions around things and try to get them to come up with their own solution. Other times it's more like athletic coaching, right? Where it's like, okay, when you get out on the field, I need you to look at points A, B, and C, avoid part D, right? And when this specific situation happens, this is what you need to remember how to do, right? So you kind of give them a scripted approach that they can kind of improv off of. So in the moment, they have an idea of how to give themselves the best chance of success. And so we would, And so we talked through this with her, right? And we said, hey, okay, what would be a successful outcome for you? Like, how could you see this going well, right? And then we would say, hey, here are some phrases that you can use to help kind of keep the situation diffused and make sure it doesn't escalate. So we say things like, I'm sorry, things aren't better between us, right? And so you're not pointing fingers, you're not taking fault for things that aren't yours. You're just acknowledging that there is a broken relationship, right? And then you posture it for their benefit to say, hey, look, I'm really, the incident was very extreme yesterday. And so, help me understand, right? How do I be the best employee for you, even as I, was in the middle of something, I couldn't answer your call, right? And so now it's a negotiation. Now it's a collaboration to say, hey, how do we, reconcile your preferences for commitment along with the fact that, what happens off the clock is, ultimately not up to you, right? And so thankfully, even if you don't necessarily get the relationship restored to like 100% where you're like excited to be around each other again, at least you have a working understanding of how to make sure that you take care of your boss and that he's respectful of your boundaries as an employee. So, she still was trying to leave the company, but at least she didn't have to leave it sooner than expected. So these are the kinds of things that we sort through, right? Whether even with parents' expectations, right? So often parents want us to be doctors, engineers, all these other, high profile, high prestige, high income professions, because for a lot of immigrants, right, that's the quickest way to earn credibility and stabilize your living situation. But what do you do when kids are like, well, we already have that, and I don't want to be a doctor just because you think that's what brings you honor, right? And now, how do you explain to your parents, hey, look, I'm going to be okay, right? Like to say, hey, I'm going to try out this dream for 6 months. If I still can't get a steady paycheck, fine, I'll go into a more stable job, right? And allowing these, kids or these children or these young professionals now, right, to be able to kind of say things a little more skillfully, respectfully, while still disagreeing. So these are the kind of situations I like to help people with.
Wow. And do you think, like I know what you explained, but do you think like her being Asian American had an impact? Like maybe if she wasn't, she would have been treated differently. I know it's kind
Oh,
of hard to say, but
no, I mean it's a fair thing to explore because, right, if she is an Asian female, right, what is the tendency? We're conflict averse. Well, in Asians in general, right, we're conflict averse, we're deferential, and so some people leverage that, right? They're just like, oh, I know I can, bully Jerry a little bit because I know he's not going to fight back if I press him on a certain issue, right? I used to be that way, right? That was the way I was brought up. My mom would tell me, hey, yeah, just whatever frustration you deal with, whatever injustice you feel, hey, just get over it. It's just not worth the fight. But it doesn't work that way in leadership. And it doesn't work that way in life, because the more resentment that builds up in you, at some point, right, it's like a powder keg that's going to explode. And you look at life very differently when you just have all this pent up resentment in you, right? And you're just drinking this poison, hoping the other person will die, right? As the common saying goes. And
wow.
it's just not healthy. And I'm recovering myself. So, this is one guy telling other people, hey, this is where you can find good bread. This is just me sharing what I've learned so that, you guys can feed off this too.
Wow. And and then you said you had another example too, um, like a second example story.
Yeah. So let's go over. I'll give a personal one. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to get people past, right? In fact, I could throw in another one after that. So growing up, at one point, I had a friend who was Muslim, and he was dating a Christian girl. And at one point, they had a bad fight, and he was asking for my input just because I'm a Christian, and he's like, what do you talk about in terms of relationships, things like that. And so I showed him some passages from the Bible that were kind of relevant to his situation, talking about reconciliation and forgiveness and all these other things. And they seem to be in conflict. And he says, well, what takes precedence? And I said, well, it's not an either or, it's a both and. So you just kind of have to pick how you want to honor both. He copies me in on the email, and I am not happy, because he basically just kind of he basically cut around whatever passage to justify his stance instead of really take the passage at, for the intent that it had. And of course, my mom, I was home for the summer. My mom sees how I react to this. And I'm like, okay, I got to talk to him. And she's like, no. It's not worth the friendship. Just, let this go. It's just not worth it. And it's like, no, like, this is terrible. Like, why he did something inappropriate and I need to talk to him about it. Right. But I was just going to listen to my mom, because at that point I didn't want to deal with my mom's insistence either. So I'll contrast this with, a more recent example of a conflict I've been dealing with. So I was at a networking event, an international networking event here in Houston at one point. And so there's all sorts of people there, all sorts of cultures. And I happened to come across an older white gentleman, nice guy. Like, we were talking, we get to talk. And this was in the middle of the Asian hate crimes that happened in Atlanta recently, right? And so he asked me about this, right? He's like, hey, so all these Asian hate crimes, like, is it really that big a deal? Like, are you okay? Have you dealt with anything? And right, so immediately I think like two things, right? One, he's genuinely curious and concerned for my safety in the middle of all this, which is probably the case, right? He's like, you're Asian, there's Asian hate crimes, how are you handling all this, right? But the other is to imply, right, that the media is sensationalizing this for ratings, and it's, and that it's really not that big a deal. And in my mind, I'm like, people are dying. Like, this is a problem, right? But instead of, like, getting my angry Asian, like, chip on my shoulder and, like, embarrassing him, like, in a public setting, right, I take a slightly different angle. And I'm not saying this as a role model. I'm just letting people know, hey, but there's a wise way to engage, right? You can stretch people without embarrassing them. Right. And so I told him, we'll call him Tim. And I said, hey, Tim, so, thankfully for me, I've not experienced any disparaging remarks or any violence, and I'm grateful. But can I run something by you? It's like, yeah, sure. Did you know that Houston's Chinatown is built on discrimination? And he goes, really? Like, what do you mean by that? I said, at one point, the city officials said, we don't like this Asian threat or what might happen, so we're just going to sequester them all in the southwest part of the city. And to add insult to injury, they draw up the district in such a way they don't even have a vote. Like, they divided up the group, and so they can't even put all their people into one vote. It's like, oh, that doesn't sound good. I'm just like, no, it's not, right? So are we thankful there's not more hate crime violence, physical violence here? Yes, I'm thankful that we haven't experienced it. And there is a bigger system of discrimination that is not okay just because people aren't physically hurt by it, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, yeah, okay, and it's like, hey, look, man, I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm not here to embarrass anybody, right? I'm just here to make sure people don't accidentally be condescending when they're talking about sensitive topics, right?
Yeah.
So, hey, I'm looking out for you, okay, right? And so now it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of fun to put him a little off balance, but, not to embarrass him, right? So anyway, things like that. Like, I want to give other Asians to be able to handle these situations when things like this come up, and they don't have to be like, oh, like, I'm angry, but I just want to stay silent because I'm afraid that if I say anything, like, the conversation might get awkward, and I don't want to be embarrassed, and I don't want to cause a scene. Maybe there's a better way, and that's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to do for them, right? It took a long time for me to be able to say something like that, right? I had to fail several times before I, found the language and a willingness to listen, really, first and foremost, right? And because, even in situations like this where you disagree with the person, you still show them dignity, you still show them respect, right? Because they're people too. True.
And now that we're into 2022, like, have you noticed a difference with the Asian hate things, or is it about the same?
Oh, Steve, I wish I could be more encouraged by the empirical evidence that's out there, right?
Yeah.
There was a scene in Utah, right, where a Filipino food truck was vandalized, and like, it was just a really ugly scene. And it's like, you've seen enough of this. This has gone on for a while, right? Like, this is not a new story. The Chinese Exclusion Act, right, is a real thing. Like, this is the first time, and it's, the hate crimes and the discrimination have been going on for quite some time now. And so, are there moments of breakthroughs? Yeah, of course there's bright spots, and I hope we highlight those and celebrate those, and just understand that the game is far from over. And that's okay, right? I think, unfortunately for all of us, right, there's just this subconscious part of humanity that we just don't want to admit to, right? That's just like ugly and closed-minded, and when that gets amplified, it's not a surprise, unfortunately. But how do you change somebody's heart, right? To say, hey, you know what, maybe there's a better way, so that we all can be seen, heard, and respected, even if we disagree.
Wow. That's a very um, insightful answer.
It
I
took a
can
while. Don't
definitely
worry. It took a while for me to get there.
no, I can definitely relate to it. I wish we could just snap a finger and it all changes, and that would
No,
be
yeah,
like really awesome.
yeah.
And like if you had to tell yourself some advice, like if you had to start all over and you were
Mhm.
able to talk to yourself starting over, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, yeah. If I had a time machine and talked to my 18-year-old self, assuming that I would receive my own advice, um, the first thing I would tell me is go global. And so I'll give some examples. Right, I got shuffled into a German language learning, track when I was in middle school and high school. And, in my mind, I'm like, when am I ever going to use this? Like, oh, like this is hard and frustrating. And I don't see how this is relevant. Steve, I've met Germans everywhere I've gone, like in Europe, Australia, Taiwan. And I just hear God, I can just imagine God telling me, I tried. I tried to open your mind. I tried. And so I still know enough to tell them how much I've forgotten, which is still impressive, but it could have been so much more to really build relationships if I had taken the time to invest in fluency, right? So that's the first thing I'll tell myself is just, yeah, like expand your world, right? Because when I went to Ireland for the first time on a pharmacy school rotation, that's when the travel bug really bit me for myself. And I just said, oh my gosh, this is such a big world. I got to immerse myself in more cultures and see all the history and all the architecture and things that are out there, right? The second thing I would tell myself is it's okay for people to disagree. You can say no, and they can say no, and understand kind of like what we talked about earlier, right? No is an okay answer, and just understand that. No, and that leads into number three. It's ultimately whatever you decide is your decision, right? Don't people please. Like if you honestly don't, if you're not excited to, take someone's offer that they've given to you, hey, if your heart's not in it, it's okay. Just say no. Like, and it's your decision, right? Like I sat through a really bad sales pitch at one point. A guy I randomly met wanted me to join like this discount travel club membership, and there's like this whole referral network and incentive and things like that. And I honestly just wanted to get to know the guy, but it was like his secret ploy to like kind of lure me in and like get to know me, but then really try to pitch me. And then it's like, okay, like it sounds great. I'm still going to say no. Like I didn't come here for that. Right. And to be able to be okay with that. And, because I don't want to say yes, just because he wants to close the sale. Like I don't want to be on the hook for that kind of money just because I was afraid to say no. And,
Exactly.
that's a hard thing to remember for myself because I grew up people pleasing. And now, I know all the times I've regretted saying yes. And I thought to myself, I can't beat myself up for not knowing to say no in the moment because a lot of people will remind me, they're like, well, you could have said no. And it's just like, I don't like it when people throw that back in my face. So I'll learn the lesson and all right, I'm going to say no.
Tough lesson, but now it's easier.
Yeah, it's a skill like any other, Steve, right? Like it's like anything else. Like forgiveness, I've realized is a skill like you can practice like any other. Leadership, conflict resolution, all these things, right? Before I used to say, wow, this person is always so gracious. They must be good at it. I don't have that. But now you realize, what if it's something I just don't need to be the best at, but I can just get better at every day? And guess what happens over a lifetime, right? At some point you get really good at it, but it takes a
Yeah,
while. Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
Well, did you have any last minute words of wisdom to
Hmm.
impart on anyone? This has been great,
Sure.
by the way. So
Oh no, good, good.
a lot
I
of good
mean,
examples, and
good.
it's very insightful.
Yeah, glad to help, man. I mean, other things I ask myself and I ask other people, is just to say, hey, um, how can you live a life without regret? Like, what would a life without regret look like for you, right? And And so it's less
Wow.
about insights as opposed to just asking questions that matter. One mantra I do like, though, in case anyone is familiar with the Designing Your Life series by the authors from Stanford, one of the best mantras one of the authors uses is that he tells himself every day, he goes, everything I do today, I choose to do. And I love that because you remind yourself that, hey, you have choices, you make them every day. And so, yeah, do we believe in the concept of fate? Sure. I mean, I can't refute it, but even as you head toward your destiny, what decisions, are you willing to make? Are you willing to say yes to the hard work and no to the Netflix? Are you willing to say yes to the broccoli and no to the, baked Alaska, right? And because I see this all the time. Like I remember there was a friend of mine who struggled with weight issues, and I remember when he committed to a diet, and then during the week he's like, oh, they have free pizza at work, and then I was like, well, it's a really hard day, and I could use myself a break, and it's just like, how's that working for you? So anyway, to sum that back up, ask yourself, what would a life without regret look like? Remind yourself that everything you do today, you choose to do. And then, just to say, hey, if you say yes to one thing, what will you say no to? And I think, we can. That's a good starting point for people, I think.
Wow. And then what's really interesting is the thing you said about regrets. Like,
Mm-hmm.
would you want to live life without regrets? What was that quote again?
I was just asking, what would a life without regret look like for you? Right?
Oh, I got you. What would a
Yeah.
life without regret look like?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what would your answer to that question be?
Oh man. Great question, Steve. I mean, for me, a life without regret is knowing I didn't sit on the sidelines for anything, letting life pass me by. And
I got you.
and that's hard because, right, like, I'm dealing with some relationship challenges now where it's like, well, am I afraid of the commitment? Will I regret passing up what could be a really great marriage to a woman, or will I regret, charging ahead and then like being in a marriage where, there were some things I didn't prepare for, and now I just feel like, I can't. And that's a hard one, right? There's a pastor I remember listening to that said, the only thing worse than being single wishing you were married is being married wishing you were single. And so I have to, keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, right, it is still my decision. And, assuming I end up in the latter, hey, you know what? It's not the end of the world. It's ultimately have to design a marriage that's actually, thriving and, built on hard work and is good, right? So it's not the end of the world, right? So just remember, hey, you still have choices. Build your way forward. Don't look back. Keep going. So yeah, but that's what I would say. Just don't let life pass you by and sit on the sidelines feeling sorry for yourself. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming in. This has really, really, really been awesome. A lot of good insights, a lot of good quotes and questions and things. And
Mhm.
it's definitely going to be helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I mean, Steve, you've been a great host, right? Like, I think I appreciate the hosts who are, very good with just answering or asking questions and, just staying engaged and doing more listening than talking. So, keep up the great work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Running from myself at times I can't describe the words I try, the fear